Since we've got you on the line, we might as well just have you pop up with the Black River Falls Commercial Historic District, Black River Falls, Jackson County.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just do this all over again.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be presenting the Black River Falls Commercial Historic District. Again, the next slide, please. Thank you. The district is located along 4 blocks of Main Street in Black River Falls and is identifiable by the largely uninterrupted blocks of masonry commercial buildings facing the street in the city's most intact historic commercial area. Next slide, please. It's comprised of 37 contributing resources and 5 non-contributing. The 5 non-contributing buildings, as typical, have been altered from their historic appearance and do not reflect the continuity of design trends in this district. Next slide, please. The surrounding neighborhoods have been excluded from the nomination due to the distance of neighboring commercial, institutional, and industrial buildings across parking areas and the prevalence of houses nearby, distinctly different architecturally from the commercial area. The district has maintained a streetscape since its earliest development that includes a wide commercial street, public lighting, and deep lots facing the primary right-of-way. Its development began with the district's oldest building, the Crandall Drug Store and Badger State Banner Building, a small commercial vernacular building constructed as early as 1868, and ends with the construction of the first Federal Savings and Loan Building, a new traditional style bank built in 1965. Next slide, please. In the 1840s, the location of the falls on the Black River was the farthest watercraft could go north. As the natural point of trade and disembarkment, this location encouraged trade and the establishment and growth of the settlement. By the late 1850s, Black River Falls had a bustling local economy in the downtown that featured post offices, banks, small businesses, and a couple of hotels. However, in 1860, much of the city was destroyed by a major fire. This trend continued, and another large fire in 1878 destroyed what was left on a large section of the commercial downtown a second time. The sawmills along the river, of which there were many at the time, were frequently destroyed by spring floods as well. Each time the mills were rebuilt, the theme in the city's history. Black River Falls had the largest commercial core in the region for nearly 50 miles at the turn of the 20th century. In October 1911, 2 upstream dams on the Black River failed due to heavy rain. Floodwaters raced downstream and broke over the dam adjacent to the falls, washing over much of the small city and destroying most of its downtown. The rain continued, covered over 45 acres of land in the city, and was washed away with 8 feet of water covering the area for over a month. Only a handful of buildings constructed before this date remain. Next slide, please. In the following 3 years, the city was nearly entirely rebuilt, and the town creek to the north was rerouted to prevent similar disasters happening again. Photographs of Black River Falls taken in 1912 show a wide dirt main street with construction everywhere, masonry buildings being constructed and sidewalks being graded along the 3 blocks. Photographs from a similar vantage point taken just 4 years later show the downtown area much as it appears presently, with rows of 2-story commercial blocks lining the recently paved street. As much as 70% of Black River Falls downtown was constructed in only these 3 years following the flood. Another 20% of the buildings were added during the 1920s and 30s, as a few remaining smaller commercial blocks were replaced with larger institutional and entertainment buildings. The economy of the city diversified away from logging and sawmilling to other service-based businesses and iron mining specifically. By 1930, the population of Black River Falls remained steady at around 2,000 inhabitants. Black River Falls grew again after the end of World War II. However, much of the downtown commercial area was already in place and continued to flourish right through the 1960s, as a few remaining lots were filled in with new construction from that period. A few older buildings, including the prominent Hotel Freeman, located at the southeast corner of Main Street and Water Street, were demolished to make room for new construction by institutions that had already existed in the city. Next slide, please. Many of the commercial buildings have some level of alteration, specifically on their street-level facades. However, they do retain sufficient integrity. Exterior changes to the buildings include window replacements in the original openings, occasional siding replacements on secondary side facades, additions to the rear, and of course, new storefronts, often repeatedly altered or replaced over the history of the building. Overall, the district is largely intact and recognizable from its historic period, and retains sufficient integrity to convey its commercial history as the center of the city. Next slide, please. A few examples of resources in the district include the Charles Van Schaik Photo Gallery. The building is one of the few buildings in the district that survived the flood. Originally constructed in 1884, the building had many tenants during its long history. notably the General Telephone Company of Wisconsin switching office during the first half of the 20th century. And the building was also home to the Jackson County Historical Society right up until 2018. Next slide, please. Built by Edward Locken in 1912, a prominent builder in Black River Falls at the time, the Locken Block contained a shoe store for much of its history known as the Enoch Locken Shoe Store, and then Jean's Bootery. The building is presently occupied by the Merchant General Store. Next slide, please. Peter Moe constructed this large building to replace its hardware store, which was destroyed in the flood, as many of the other buildings were, as you'll hear. The main tenant remained Moe's Hardware right up until 1976, when the business moved to another location along Main Street. The corner lot has 3 storefronts. Next slide, please. Constructed by E.L. Ormsby in 1912 following the flood, this building has had many tenants, including a short stint as the U.S. Post Office, the Charles Walden Barbershop, which existed here from the 1920s to the 1960s, and the Reichert Dentist Office as well. Next slide, please. This 1914 corner building has historically contained 3 large storefronts on the first floor and occupies a prominent position in the city as one of the first commercial buildings seen in the district when crossing the Black River from the east, the main way into town. The Tallock family has been an influential group in Black River Falls during the late 19th and early 20th century and owned and constructed many of the buildings. Next slide, please. Freeman Dell built this commercial block in 1914 with 2 storefronts, and by the late 1920s, the building was shared between the Hillique grocery store and the Dervas and Cordis candy factory. In the post-war period, the building was home to the Gamble store, a common department store that continued to operate here into the 1980s. Next slide, please. The original First National Bank building was, of course, destroyed by flooding in 1911 and rebuilt at the same location the following year. One of the 2 prominent financial institutions in Black River Falls, the bank merged with Jackson County Bank in 1933 to remain solvent during the Depression years. The bank changed its name and eventually moved in 1964 to a new building at the southwest corner of Main Street and Water Street, just outside the district. Next slide, please. The Romanesque Masonic Temple was the home of the Black River Lodge number 74 and was constructed in 1913. The Masons held weekly meetings here from the 1910s to the 1960s, and the building is still home to the Masons locally. Next slide, please. One of my personal favorites, the Art Deco Avalon Theater, was constructed in 1929. Replaced a series of smaller 1- and 2-story brick commercial buildings when it was completed, and features 4 small storefront retail shops in addition to the lobby of the movie theater space behind. The theater continued to operate into the 1960s, and the adjacent spaces have been occupied by a series of many tenants. Next slide, please. This 1938 Art Moderne post office replaced a series of post office locations throughout the downtown area that had been used since the flood in 1911. This building was designed by Lou Simon of the Office of Supervising Architect for the U.S. Department of the Treasury and his associate engineer, Neil Mellick. Many such post offices were constructed in Wisconsin and around the nation, and there are likely nearly identical examples of this building elsewhere. The interior lobby, however, includes an original mural over one wall, painted by Frank Buffmeyer, that distinctly depicts the first sawmill at Black River Falls and the early settlement history, including the history of the Ho-Chunk people. The Treasury Department funded such paintings, and the building itself, for the building projects during the 1930s, were separate from the arts funding for the Works Progress Administration. Next slide, please. This was the old U.S. Post Office building. It was first constructed on this site in 1887. The building was not demolished during or after the 1911 flood, and elements of it likely still exist beneath the extant facade. The 1948 storefront of the property, which is very visible and has been the home of the Jackson County Abstract Office. Next slide, please. The 1961 optometrist's office was constructed on a site that had remained vacant for many years previously, and was later expanded with a large rear addition in 1968 that consciously continues with the contemporary style of this small office building. Next slide, please. The common experience of the destructive flood of 1911 and the following rebuilding efforts of the commercial core of Black River Falls contributes to the architectural significance of this district. While the area was commercial in use before the flood, and most of the buildings from the previous period were destroyed and reflected a 19th century architectural language. Most of the contributing resources then were constructed within a few years and often with a very similar commercial vernacular architectural vocabulary. Next slide, please. The area was primarily occupied by thriving commercial businesses that provided a wide range of goods and services to the small city and to the surrounding area, nearly all of Jackson County, demonstrating the evolution of the community from a growing settlement frontier town to a logging center, and eventually to an agricultural and industrial small city that survived numerous natural disasters, to the more diffuse modern community you see today. Next slide, please. The Black River Falls Commercial Historic District is nominated under Criterion A, locally significant in the area of commerce for its association as the center of business activity in Black River Falls from the late 19th century to the mid-20th century. The district's also nominated under National Register Criterion C, locally significant to the area of architecture, demonstrating a range of commercial and institutional architectural styles popular during this period of development from 1868 to 1965. Thank you for listening again. Any questions or comments?
This isn't a question, Rowan. This is a town that I've had the privilege over the years of working in and getting to know. And my comment here is, if people can get off the track sometime and take this little community in, it'll be well worth your trip. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting, the history and the way that people take care of it and their mindfulness of everything that's going on. It's a really interesting spot in Jackson County, and how they learn to live along the river with that central business district is pretty amazing. So it's just a sharing an idea that this is a town I've spent a fair time in. It's pretty cool.
I agree. If you ever drive by the Orange Moose, get off the highway for a few minutes and see Black River Falls. It's very cool.
All right, do we have a motion to approve this, the Black River Falls Commercial Historic District?
Stephens moves to approve.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Matt. Board discussion?
There was one reference to the Ho-Chunk Treaty of 1838. That should actually be 1837. And I may submit a few suggestions to the removal language of the Ho-Chunk and their return, using words more like forced removal instead of just removal. They didn't remove themselves. And also that they weren't all removed and they didn't all return. So I can offer a few suggestions via email that way.
Thank you.
Paul, I appreciate that. And if we connect after the meeting, I'd be happy to take your comments. Thank you.
Yeah, especially since that's the Ho-Chunk Nation capital city. So
yes.
Ben, do we have any correspondence?
Yes, we do. Sorry, I get so excited when it's my turn. Okay. So we have Jeff Smith is the Wisconsin State Senator of the 31st District. He is writing to esteemed members of the Preservation Review Board. Thank you for the consideration of the Black River Falls Commercial Historic District. And he is recommending approval of this nomination. I also want to say that we did receive 2 owner objections for this district, but this does not constitute a majority of owners.
Great.
That's it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Amy, do we have anybody, owners or people that want to comment that are on the call?
No public requests to comment.
All right. Any other comment from the board members themselves? All right, if not, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor of adding the Black River Falls Commercial Historic District to the state and National Registers of Historic Places, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Fabulous, great. Motion passes. Rowan, two great presentations, thank you.
Thank you.